So welcome back to another episode, and today I'm going to talk about my favorite games on the TurboGrafx Mini right here. I imported this from Japan, I couldn't wait, and all week I've been playing all of the games. And I gotta say, what a trip down memory lane. It's been fantastic, and I just wanted to talk about some of my favorite games on the machine and why, and some of my memories with them. Some of my memories going back nearly 30 years. And also, as an added thing, I have Chris Tang, the Sega World Champion. He's going to come in as well and talk about one of his favorite games on the TurboGrafx Mini and why he likes it so much. And I thought it was interesting. I asked Chris to put that story in this video. He said yes, so I'm thankful to have that. We'll get to him in a little bit for sure. So I thought we'd start off with one of my favorite games on the machine, a game I really enjoyed quite a bit, and that is Nutopia right here. This is the original copy right here. Here's what's nuts. I bought it in 1990, 30 years ago. And I'll never forget the summer when I got it. I was working a terrible drywalling job. I wasn't doing the drywalling. I was just picking up the junk and the crap in all of these buildings, no pun intended in a second, and throwing them out. I'm telling you, this job was horrible. All I was doing is throwing out garbage. The problem is, the workers were so disgusting and so gross, they would piss in some of these boxes with this plastic in it, and I had gloves and everything, and I had to throw this stuff out because they were too lazy to go downstairs. And I was a little kid, I was 15 years old. They could take advantage of me. I'm like, oh my God, how did I get this goddamn job? So let me tell you something. I earned Nutopia that summer, let me say. What do I want to say about Nutopia? I love it, and it is definitely a Zelda clone. Everybody will say that. But here's the thing, that's not a bad thing. Back then, I had Zelda, and I had Nutopia. And the thing is, Nutopia looks so much better. I remember the very first time I saw the water effect in Nutopia, I was like, oh my God, this is absolutely incredible. Look at that. And remember how video games look now compared to then. That was an amazing effect. You couldn't believe that was happening, especially coming off like the NES and then going to the TurboGrafx and seeing that. That was something else. I also remember back then is looking in video game magazines and seeing the character. I only saw one screenshot, and I'm like, oh, interesting. The character has a beard and just like two little bitty eyes. I'm like, okay. I didn't realize until I started playing the game, that was the back of his head, but the screenshot was so small, and he's such an SD character, like a super deformed character, I couldn't make out that it was the back of his head, so I'm like, oh, okay. Like, so when I started playing the game, I'm like, he looks way better than that character with a beard, so. But I spent that summer playing it, and I got a lot of fun out of it, and it's a play-by-play of Zelda, let me say. You know, planting bombs and fighting monsters the same way. Now, I gotta say that I liked Nutopia 2 quite a bit, because in Nutopia 1, your character could only swing your sword up, down, left, or right. But the problem with that is, some of the enemies come at you on a certain angle and will hit you, and I used to hate that. I'd be like, so frustrated. So in Nutopia 2, what's really good is your character can use his sword on different angles now, which was really good. Now, another favorite game on the TurboGrafx, it was actually in Japan only. It was on the Super CD-ROM system in Japan, and that was Ghost Warrior Spriggan right here. This is fantastic stuff. I got this, man, I was 17 years old. I'll put a picture of myself right here at 17. This is me in high school, the same age of when I got this game, and so funny to see myself back then. It's interesting because we saw it in a mall just before Christmas time, and I said to my parents, oh man, I'd love to get this game. And they're like, oh, okay, and they didn't pay attention. Christmas morning, I got it, and it was awesome. And I gotta say, the graphics are really amazing in it, but it's the gameplay, it's so addicting. I mean, you collect different orbs, and they're different orb elements. And depending on the different orb elements that you put together, you get different weapons. So my main one was always to get 2 greens and a yellow, and that was the big, green blasting effect that you got. That was my weapon of choice. I hated it if I picked up another orb. It would always drive me nuts, and I'd always end up dying. I always liked getting my main weapon, but I think it was the graphics, but the cinematics, and hearing the Japanese voice in cinematics back then was a big deal. As I say, nearly 30 years ago, it was a big deal. I absolutely love that game, and here's the thing, I've been playing it the last week. I can't get enough of it. and it brings a lot of memories back. I remember I got to this one level and I'm like, I forgot what I would always do because the level is scrolling, and I try to hit pause at the right time so you can see on the background a little house. If you pause it at the right time, you can see a little house, and I always used to do that back then, and that's a testament of the detail they put into the game, and especially all the little characters running around in the backgrounds while you're bombing and fighting all this like alien ships and stuff like that. Absolutely amazing. And yes, Easebooks 1 and 2 is on here in English, and it is glorious. I was up late the other night playing it, and I love the game so much. It's an action overhead RPG, and to me, there's not a lot of nostalgia in there, but it's a really good game that stands up till today. The gameplay and what you do, and there's a lot of little tricks and things that you can do to gain a little bit of extra money right at the beginning of the game. And I remembered all these things, and I was like, oh my god, I remember why I like this game so much. Also, the music is godlike. The music is godlike, and I highly recommend it. Did you know this? I know it's called Easebooks 1 and 2, but there's 2 games in here. Easebooks 1, and then you transition into Easebooks 2, which is a separate game. And that's what's so big about this game back then, is that they bundled both those games together, gave them really excellent graphics and an amazing soundtrack, and finally, people can play this. The originals. I love it. Now I'm gonna hand it off to the legendary Chris Tang and find out what one of his choices is for his favorite games on the TurboGrafx Mini.
So I'm going to talk about my favorite thing about the TurboGrafx 16 and PC Engine Minis, and a bit of the background behind it. For me, it goes all the way back to the arcades, and 2 of my favorite arcade games were Space Harrier and Life Force, because of their fast scrolling speeds, and when you started the game it would say things like, "Welcome to the Fantasy Zone, get ready!" or "Destroy them all!" when you push the start button. And that would just get me pumped up to blow everything away and have a blast. And the skills that I gained and the enjoyment that I had from them served me well into the future. The games became a huge part of my life. Eventually they announced a version of Life Force for the 8-bit Nintendo, the NES, and I got it. Super excited about it. I was screaming when I saw the thing in Nintendo Fun Club News. And it was good, but it was a bit slow. Even got the Famicom version. It was a little bit better. And I wondered if there would be a better version of the game in the future. Eventually I ended up being in the video game business, and one of my coworkers, Jeff Yonan, I visited his house, and in his kitchen he had the arcade version of Life Force, and I'm like, I want that someday. But less than a year later he said, hey, do you want to trade something for it? And of all things, he wanted a PC Engine Super System card. So I traded that, and I ended up getting the arcade Life Force board here. One of my favorite things I've ever had. And I'm like, okay, well once I have the arcade game, do I need anything more? Like, I already have it. There can be no better version, right? But at the time, the PC Engine had become my favorite game system. And it was because playing games like Space Harrier, and later on games like Dracula X and Lords of Thunder and Sapphire, it's still my favorite game system of all time. But in 1991, they announced a version of Salamander or Life Force for it. And I got it, and it was good. It was fast. It had great gameplay, but it was missing one thing. It didn't have the voices. It didn't say destroy them all when you pushed run. So I was a little disappointed, but now you fast forward all these years later to the present, and the PC Engine Mini and the TurboGrafx Minis were announced, and there's this list of 50-something games, and on the day that it was released, even though everybody knew the game list, they said there were secret games on the PC Engine Mini, and it was Gradius Near Arcade and Fantasy Zone Near Arcade. If you held select, it would push the start to start your game. It would load a closer to arcade port. They reported the arcade game to the PC Engine to make it better. And they hinted that there would be a report of Salamander or Life Force on the TurboGrafx and CoreGrafx Minis, which had been delayed a little bit longer. And I did everything I could to look up, like, does it have the voice? Was it going to be a complete report, or what was it going to have in it? So I had to wait until I actually got it in my hands to answer those questions. And here's my CoreGrafx Mini. I've actually converted it to be a PC Engine LT portable Mini. And here's Life Force Salamander. Holding select and pushing 1 will load a different version of the game. And destroy them all. When I heard that for the first time, it was just the best. Pick it up for multiple, and all those other sound effects. that and voice effects that just made it so exciting. So that to have new development done on my favorite platform of all time, which is the PC Engine, on one of my favorite games of all time, which is Salamander or Life Force, was a gift. And to me, it is my favorite thing to ever come out of this entire mini console phenomenon, because who would go back and report an arcade game to an old system like the PC Engine? But M2 did that. They added the voice that it was missing, and it brought me so much happiness and excitement. And just to have that that moment where you start up the game and having a new PC Engine experience, TurboGrafx experience here in the year 2020 is just amazing. And I just thought I'd share that story with you, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I was talking to Chris, and I was like, that's such a great story. You're going to share it. I'm so happy that he did. Now, what are some other games that are really good on the machine? Some more shooters you want? Absolutely. Soldier Blade is fantastic. I think the gameplay is so easy to get into. The graphics are really, really detailed. Excellent, catchy soundtrack. And speaking of like good shooters as well, try out R-Type. R-Type is a lot of fun. A great old arcade game back in the day that was ported to nearly every machine known to mankind. For me, back in the day, I had it on the TurboGrafx, and I would play it religiously every single day because I was terrible at the game. And I remember there was so much slowdown in the game itself, in the original, that I could use it to kind of avoid bullets and stuff like that. Slowdown is a great thing in a shooter, let me tell you, especially back then. And I'm telling you, R-Type, it had me going for like a year before I finished that game. That game drove me absolutely nuts, but I loved it. Now, another obvious choice is Dracula X. And a lot of people will be saying, why is this such a big deal? Well, let me say, on the PC Engine back then, you had never seen graphics like this in a CD game. You had never seen it like this. It was amazing. You couldn't believe that it was on the PC Engine. It was like an arcade game. And then you heard the soundtrack, and the soundtrack is legendary, it is classic, and it's amazing. But it's the gameplay. It's basic Castlevania at its finest, but it just feels so good. And just the environments and the monsters and the bosses that you're fighting, it's really good. You definitely have to play Dracula X. What a treat. The next one is a very strange choice for me to recommend because I am no good at these style of games in reality, but I love video game forms of it, and that is pinball games. Alien Crush. I thought it was amazing, reminding me of H.R. Giger back in the day, his design work in a pinball game. And I loved it, and I was playing it the other night, and I got a really good score, and I was like, I'm having fun with this. And I don't play a lot of real big pinball games, the real ones. I have friends that are absolutely obsessed with them, but I've never really gotten into that side of it. So for me, just to turn it on my TurboGrafx and play it, I really liked it, and I loved it back in the day. I like the sound effects, but I love the design of the pinball machine itself in video game form. Now, the SuperGrafx version of Ghouls and Ghosts is here, and it's a really competent version. It's one of my favorites, in fact, and I was playing it the other day, and I was like, Ghouls and Ghosts is one of my favorite games of all time on the Genesis. And when I played it on the SuperGrafx, I was like, wow, this is a really good version of it. Now, obviously, the SuperGrafx crashed and burned and disappeared forever, so this is kind of a really unique way to play Ghouls and Ghosts for the mainstream on your high-definition TV. And I love Ghouls and Ghosts in general, the design of it, the monsters, the animation, the sound effects, the gameplay. And the gameplay is hard. The gameplay is hard, but remember one thing, if you play it enough, you'll memorize all of the places on the map and all the different things you have to do. It's a repetition when you're first playing it. Nobody plays Ghouls and Ghosts the first time and just aces their way through it. That's impossible. But the more and more you play it, the better at it you'll get, especially for an older style game like this. I love Ghouls and Ghosts. And another recommendation, because it is so unusual in that it is so expensive to buy in reality, to own a physical copy of it is ridiculous. It's over $1,000 to get this game in reality. So for anybody who got it in ROM, that was the way to play it for sure. That's the way I played it back in the day as well. But finally, we can play the Japanese Sapphire game. What is the hype about Sapphire? I'll tell you, it was the scrolling backgrounds. It's the polygon enemies, and some of them are really huge on the screen, but you'll still be saying, why is that a big deal? where it's a big deal because that didn't happen on the PC Engine. There wasn't many games that ever attempted to try to do that. This is a game that went all in, trying to do some very different graphical looks with the machine itself. And I think what it is people couldn't believe that the PC Engine could do these style of graphics. And I believe that game is pushing it to the max. It has definitely got the arcade card there for sure, but it's still magnificent what they did. And it's a fun game. It's a bit difficult, but it's fun. And I like the anime style graphics of the characters. I like the ships, but some of the bosses are absolutely ridiculous as well. They're really cool to see. And this game has some writing in it that is so ridiculous and so over the top. You're like, what is this game saying? One of the lines is this: "It's dangerous for you to come." That's in the game. That's there. I'm not making this up. That is in the game. You gotta love games in the 90s from Japan. So ridiculous. And last but not least, obviously there's so many other great choices. What are some of your favorite games on the TurboGrafx Mini? Let me know down below. One of my favorites on the machine as well is Dungeon Explorer. I first played it back in 1989. I played it with some friends and we enjoyed it back then. And realistically, what it is a gauntlet-style dungeon exploring game that you could do with the multi-tap at the time. So you could have extra controllers and bring all your friends into it and have a really good, fun dungeon exploring thing. It is just you shooting enemies in a dungeon, just like Gauntlet, but it's fun, and there's something about the soundtrack, and it's really kind of dark and ominous. I remember finishing the game in like an hour or something like that. It's really pretty simple, but it's fun. It's fun to sit around with your friends and play this game. I'm picking up a multi-tap and some extra controllers for when I can actually play with my friends again in a video game. So looking forward to that, but having a really good time with the TurboGrafx Mini. And guess what? It's gonna get better because the modding community is all over this thing. So they'll be able to dump every single game onto here pretty soon. They're already fixing Lords of Thunder and its lag problem right now as we speak. So we've got to thank them 100% for doing all the hard work. This is going to be a machine that keeps on giving. I'm going to get through Eastbooks 1 and 2. That's one of my personal goals, to finish that game again because I love it so much. So anyways, guys, until next time.